Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very musical themed edition of Ranking Spankings, our bi-weekly ranking show, this time on the channel UDS Music. So for people who are checking this out that don't know, this is the side hustle, side project channel of Upside Down Shark, where we talk about music, we interview bands, we talk about the music we like. If you're a fan of all other things pop culture, check out Upside Down Shark. But for now, I am one of your hosts, Tom, and I am joined by my regular rankings expert, one Matthew Dobby.
Enchanté, Tom.
Shantae indeed. How are you doing?
All right, get to talk about something cool, don't I?
Yeah, we should probably tell them what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about Foo Fighters. At time of recording, we are but a few days away from the release of Foo Fighters' newest album, entitled what, Dobby?
Medicine at Midnight.
Medicine at Midnight. I like a good bit of Night Nurse at Midnight. It sends me right off to sleep. Are you excited for this album, Dobby?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think the singles so far, we've had 3 singles so far, which are called Shame, Shame, No Son of Mine, and Waiting on a War. I think 2 of them have been really good. I think one of them has been the worst single the Foo Fighters have ever done. I think I'm excited for it. But then the Foo Fighters are one of my favourite bands, and I always get excited for their new stuff, even though sometimes it turns out to be not necessarily up to scratch.
Well, that is the purpose of this here list right here, because we are going to rank, compare, and contrast all of the previous albums in, in preparation for the release of the new one. Are you? I assume as a fan, you are well versed on all of the releases of the Foo Fighters.
I sure am. I know everything like the back of your hand.
How many Foos have you fought?
9 studio albums so far.
There we go. He brings it back round to relevance. So we have got the patented Foo Fighters rating system. It's been tried and tested for many years, and we are going to adopt it now. We have got everything from the top, which is very good, very good. Then we got A, B, C, and if it's an album that we just both really can't get on with, it is, of course, Foo Fighters. This series is called Ranking Spankings, so this is very much our MO, but we'll please forgive us.
And we are the rankers.
and the spankers. But anyway, I am also a fan of the Foo Fighters. I am looking forward to reminiscing about their releases, and should we dive in?
Hit it.
Should we do this? Do them chronologically or
chronological order? Just makes perfect sense to me.
Let's do it that way then. So, what do we start with, Dobby?
Foo Fighters.
It's always good when a band starts with a self-titled. It just makes it nice and easy. So this was released, I believe, in I want to say '94. It was Dave Grohl's first project after obviously the breakup of Nirvana. I believe he basically recorded the whole album himself. It is effectively like a one-man project at this time.
Except for like one guitar part, I think. Yeah.
It's very much the Dave Grohl show, which obviously the Foo Fighters would become a more.
It came out in '95, by the way.
95. My apologies. Same year I was born. Good year, good vintage. So immediate thoughts about Foo Fighters' self-titled album, Dobby.
It's rough and ready, and it was very much of its time. I think when you listen to it. Incidentally, I listened to it this morning as well, and it holds up very well, considering it was just Dave Grohl basically getting into a room on his own, having a bit of fun for a week or 2 or whatever it was, and then choosing to release it under a name he just picked at random. It's very quintessentially Foo Fighters. You can see strands to everything they still do nowadays fully within this album, and the songwriting's not necessarily quite at its peak, and I think, we'll get to over the course of this episode that Foo Fighters are probably the greatest singles band in the history of music. And so I don't think you've necessarily got any of those. No, that's not fair, because This Is a Call opens the album. Mm-hmm. I think it's a perfect mission statement for the Foo Fighters, even if it wasn't necessarily meant as one.
Absolutely, and as you say, sort of coming so soon after the demise, probably not the right terminology,
the demise,
the end of Nirvana.
Okay, I thought you were just going to say Kurt Cobain.
No,
demise of Kurt Cobain.
Oh, jeez, too soon. It's very much a album in of itself. Obviously, he could have been tempted to just release something that sounded like, just like Nirvana, but he went in his own direction, and he's done a fantastic job. The only thing I would say, which is sort of a blessing and a curse of this album, is that it's very top heavy in terms of quality. The opening 3 tracks, This Is a Call, I'll Stick Around, Big Me, all 3 of which were singles, are in my opinion, the 3 best songs on the album, which is always the curse of, weighting the front of the album with all the best tracks, is that you can only go downhill from there. So it's one of those albums that starts strong but sort of wanes off a little bit, which leaves not a sour taste, but the lingering opinion isn't such a strong one, in my opinion.
I would go as far as to say the first 5, because I think Alone and Easy Target is also brilliant. I think that was also a radio single, not an official single as such. Good Grief is also great. I think Floaty is the point at which the decline starts, but then you get Weenie Beanie straight after, which is just incredible. Oh George is pretty great too. For All the Cows might be my favourite on the album. Ecstatic's one that always just sort of leaves my mind after I hear it. Watershed is great, and Exhausted is just a really good closure as well. So I would agree it's top heavy. Those first 5 tracks are exceptional. But is it necessarily lacking in the back end? No, I don't think so.
I think, as you say, it's raw, it's rough and ready, and as you say, there's not really a bad song, but I think it definitely starts off stronger than it finishes. Just doing a little bit of on-air research now, I really appreciate the record label that Dave Grohl started to release this album is called Roswell Records, which falls into line with the theme of Foo Fighters, UFO Fighters. So
I don't know if you can see the logo, but it always makes me think of Bender from Futurama.
Oh, I haven't. Let me have a quick look. Yeah, I can see that. I'll flash it up on screen now so people can see it. Yeah, I like that. And that's a whole 4 years before Futurama.
Yeah,
there you go. That's some serendipity right there. So we got to rank this album. Where do you think it goes in the leaderboard?
Well, part of me thinks, knowing what we've got coming today, it would be remiss of me to put this particularly high. But I think it's B or A, really.
I was thinking B, personally, purely because otherwise, I think it goes without saying that we're not ranking these in sort of the grand context of music as a whole. We are ranking these between the albums, because otherwise a lot of them would be like near the top because we're both
fans. Is the thing, isn't it? Because my own bias will show when we're talking about Foo Fighters, or over the coming months and years as we talk about more on this music channel. We'll get to bands I love, and I'll just want to put everything in top tiers. And so it's difficult for me to sort of sit and be subjective, I guess. But if I am being subjective, which is what my aim is to be here, I think this is kind of middle of the road in terms of what they've released. So I'd say B tier.
Yep, I agree. And then we move on to 2 years in the future, 1997, with The Colour and the Shape. And
The Hit Factory.
Without sort of shooting my load too early, this is my favourite Foo Fighters album, so I would be inclined to drop it right in the top.
I think today, on the day of recording, this is my second favourite Foo Fighters album, but it sort of changes all the time. It's between 2 frequently for me. I mean, we can just shout that right now. This is obviously going in S tier. This is, I mean, you've got Everlong, you've got Monkey Wrench, you've got My Hero, you've got...
Hey Johnny Park. Not a single, but a absolutely fantastic track.
What's the other single? There are 4.
Walking After You.
Walking After You. I mean, that's not as big a hit, I suppose, is it really, that one? But
it's the weakest single as well, because they released it for like the X-Files movie, I think. And,
so the version they did for that was a slightly more jazzed up. I say jazzed up, not meaning jazzy, but it was a bit more up-tempo. Yeah, too jazzy. It was a weird video as well. But I quite like Walking After You. But even aside from that, you've got this shows the dynamic range of Foo Fighters perfectly, this album. You get full on heavy shout at you in Wind Up, which might be my favorite on the album. You get the song like My Poor Brain just starts with noise, and a wonderful noise as well. I love it. I think that could also be my favorite. In fact, those two, Hey Johnny Park, My Poor Brain into, Wind Up, that's my favorite 3 songs on the album. And this is an album that starts with Doll into Monkey Wrench into Hey Johnny Park itself. I mean, we spoke about the first few songs on the first Foo Fighters album. Doll is as an opener, it's fine. But beyond that, Monkey Wrench, Johnny Park, My Poor Brain, Wind Up, Up in Arms, My Hero, See You, Enough Space, February Stars, Everlong. That's, I don't think there's a duff one in there. You get to Walking After You, that's debatable. But then it ends with No New Way Home, which is astounding as a closer. I love New Way Home.
And even Doll is serves a purpose of sort of leading you into that full sense of security before that first note of Monkey Wrench just whacks you right in the face.
Yeah.
And it's one of those albums that even now, over 20 years later, I still hear new things. Like I can't remember the guy, but there's a famous music YouTuber, and he sort of dissects and breaks apart songs like sort of layer by layer. And in Everlong, the do 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 do, there is a female voice mixed into the track, just that adds that high, and then once you notice it's there, you can't forget about it, and you always notice it. Apparently it's the singer of the grunge band Veruca Salt who contributed the vocals. But yeah, I had no idea until I saw that video that layer was in that track, and it's just amazing how sort of meticulous it's all sort of been put together. And yeah, I think it's the album that I first discovered Foo Fighters. Like, it came out when I was 2, so I can't say I listened to it when it first came out, but my dad was a fan, and so I got in through it, that one. Monkey Wrench was on Kerrang and Scuzz TV, the music channel.
I mean, it's Monkey Wrench, it's My Hero, and it's Everlong. Those three, if the album was just those 3 songs, it would still be S tier, but it's got everything else around it. And I mean, again, this is probably something we'll touch on. Foo Fighters, certainly in regards to their singles, are omnipresent. They're everywhere. Those 3 songs especially, the colour and the shape.
Almost to a fault sometimes, as we'll get to
almost
later.
To a fault. We'll certainly I know we'll get to that with you. And I mean, when it comes to the Foo Fighters, nowadays, if I'm listening to the Foo Fighters, I do tend to skip the singles because, frankly, I know what they sound like. I can just listen to them right now if I want to, with nothing playing. I'll be honest as well, when I go and see them live, I'd sooner they played some of the other stuff, because I've seen The Pretender every time I've seen them, and they always drag it out to about 10 minutes, and it doesn't need to be that long, frankly. You've got other songs to play. Colour and shape is S tier. Very good,
Absolutely.
very good.
Absolutely. Can't argue with that. Then we move forward another 2 years to There Is Nothing Left to Lose, the 1999 album, in which Dave Grohl cut his hair to look like an extra from Friends. Yes, this is another album that I loved the pants off of. I don't think it's one of those albums that is sort of held in the same reverence as the colour and the shape, but it's just so good. It's so good. Tracks like Generator, Learn to Fly. Oh, it's so good.
I think a lot of people tend to think of There Is Nothing Left to Lose as Learn to Fly, and then every other track is on it as well. And that's not fair. There are also a lot of people who would swear blind by There Is Nothing Left to Lose. I think I'm not in the middle. I certainly skew more towards swearing blind by it, but I don't see, this is an album I do think sort of loses its way a little bit in the back end. I think the first 5 tracks of There Is Nothing Left to Lose, you've got Stacked Actors, which is just in your face. Breakout, which is just wow, great. Learn to Fly. Gimme Stitches, which is a very underrated song. I love Gimme Stitches. Generator, as you say, great. Aurora, which is my favourite on the album. Aurora, it's weird for me when it comes to Foo Fighters to pick a slower one as a favourite, but Aurora just does it for me. Those 6 songs, untouchable. You get to Live in Skin, it's good, but I still think it's a noticeable drop from Aurora and everything before it. Next Year comes back in. I think Next Year's pretty top tier. In terms of their singles, it might be my least favourite, up until the most recent Shame Shame came out. But then you get Headwires, Ain't It Life, and MIA. And while they're good songs, I think they are noticeably not as good as the first half.
Fair enough. I quite like Next Year purely because of the music video. I'm a big sucker for sort of...
The video is the saving grace. I think as a song, it goes on a little bit.
Yeah, I can see that. I am one of those people that just loves this album. I think, again, there's a lot of nostalgia involved with the music videos because they released a lot of good music videos for this album.
I mean, Learn to Fly.
Yeah. I mean, it's got Tenacious D in it.
To be fair. Yeah.
Breakout was for
Me, Myself, and
Irene. Yeah. And yeah, that is another killer track. As much as in my personal ranking, I would probably put it in very good, very good. I think on balance, it's probably A tier.
I'm very happy to put it in A tier.
Let's put it in A tier. Now, to what I will hazard a guess to say is our first controversial pick. and that is 2002's One by One, the album that even the Foo Fighters themselves didn't like. So, yeah, this was apparently a difficult album to create. It created a lot of tension within the band to the point where apparently they almost broke up making this album.
Well, this was around the period that Dave was playing with Queens of the Stone Age, and if you've seen the Foo Fighters Back and Forth documentary, there's a whole section in there which is really interesting because it really sort of paints the whole period in a new light. When you look at One by One, I mean, you've got All My Life and Times Like These on this album. Those are two of their biggest songs.
Well, that's the
thing.
And
yet, the rest of the album, I think a lot of people tend to forget. I mean, the second track on the album is a ballbuster, one of the heaviest songs the Foo Fighters have ever done in Low, with a very strange video.
Oh god, yeah, I was never allowed to watch that video when I was younger.
Well, I remember there was a time when it wasn't allowed to be shown on TV before 9 p.m.
Yeah.
Usually it had to be after the Watershed. I have quite a soft spot for this album, frankly. I understand why there are people who don't like it. I think most of the tracks on this are very underrated, personally.
See, I am one of those people that probably, to a fault, didn't only listen to the singles, but the singles only resonated with me. And I think this is the first example of the Foo Fighters having singles to a fault, where the select tracks are so much better than the rest of the album. So I would say this is the first one where I didn't listen to it sort of top to front and think, oh yeah, this is an album I could revisit time and time again. And so for that reason, I would say, again, with a caveat of saying this is purely a ranking within the discography of the Foo Fighters, C tier.
So here's what I'm going to say, is I mean, Times Like These is my favourite Foo Fighters song, one of my favourite songs ever, frankly. That doesn't elevate it on its own. All My Life is just exceptional. Doesn't elevate it on its own. I think One by One is the first Foo Fighters album which you kind of have to listen to front to back to really get into the groove of, because there are tracks that speak to each other thematically. Disenchanted Lullaby into Tired of You, into... It's not quite into, because Halo comes in the middle, but then you get Lonely as You. And I think those three tracks together speak to you in a way that they just can't when they're played separately. And we weren't in playlist culture when this came out, but I think because All My Life and Times Like These are thrown out within the first four tracks, I think a lot of people would say, okay, I don't need to keep listening at this point. But this ends with a song called Come Back, which is nearly 8 minutes. It's the longest song the Foo Fighters have ever recorded. And it's like a post-rock, I don't want to say the word opera, but it's just incredible. And I think, whilst I am going to come down sort of in the same sort of bracket as you when it comes to ranking this, I would say I think One by One is incredibly underrated, even by the band themselves, and is well worth revisiting. That said, I'd love to give it a B tier, but I'm happy to give it a C tier as well.
Well, we can always move the rankings round a little bit later, but we'll drop it in C for now and come back to it. But yeah, it's definitely an album that I want to revisit at some point, just to check out those tracks there.
When was the last time you listened to it?
Christ, a long time ago that I haven't.
I think you'd take a lot more out of it nowadays.
I'd like to think so. And I tell you what, it's an album that I'd want to revisit before I'd revisit In Your Honor again, which is the next album. Because boy howdy, this might be my least favourite Foo Fighters album.
It's not mine.
Well, I disagree.
Unless we're counting them as two separate things, but we're not. So, In Your Honor is a double album. The first album is the rock songs. The second album is an acoustic album. I think the first album on its own would be top tier Foo Fighters, as far as I'm concerned. I love it. I think it's nearly front to back bangers. There's a couple of iffy songs on there. I don't think it ends particularly well. I know, we'll talk about Best of You in a minute, which you're not particularly big into. Mm-hmm. But it opens with In Your Honor, which is a great, just fucking screaming and just having a great old time. And then you get No Way Back, which is an incredible song, which is very underrated in the Foo Fighters single chronology. I'd love to see them play that more. Then you get Best of You, you get DOA. Those four, on their own, top tier. You then get a little 2-minute track called Hell, which is really good. The last song comes in the middle, funnily enough, which is really great. Free Me is another one of those. Free Me is a song I think you could easily forget, but when you listen to it, you just remember like, oh, this is really good fun. Resolve is one of my favourite Foo Fighters songs, but again, massively underrated in their singles chronology. The Deepest Blues of Black is pretty good. End Over End is astonishingly good. The Sign I can't really remember, but that first album of the double album, I think, were it released just as that, it would get so much more praise than it gets. And I think, equally, a lot of the praise this album should be getting gets lumped onto Best of You instead of everything else on the album. I think that single did so well that nothing else on the album sort of got a look in a way. And we'll talk about it in a minute. You're shaking your head already. Tom doesn't like Best of You. Tom thinks it's their worst single. And I mean, he's mad for thinking it. I'll let him tell you why in a minute. It's Best of You is an astonishing song. In the live show, it's just a moment of just pure brilliance whenever they play it. Every time I'm willing to see Best of You, and I love it. It's just screaming and emotion, and the instruments are played so well. Like, the Foo Fighters can get a bit of stick for not necessarily pushing the boat out too much, but Best of You is a song you can listen to and you can just see the master strokes that every member of that band has when playing their instrument. And I think it is to a fault, because I think the rest of the album just doesn't get a look in. Everyone's like, Best of You. In Your Honor is Best of You. And they forget everything else. We'll touch on the second disc in a minute. I'll let Tom say his thing.
My problem with the Best of You, I have a few problems. One of them isn't the track's fault, and that is, this came out at a time when music TV was kind of not at its peak, but it was the time that I was consuming it the most, and you couldn't go 5 minutes on either Kerrang, Scuzz, MTV2, MTV Rocks, whatever it was called at the time, without listening to Best of You. And I think the oversaturation of that track, at the expense of what I think are better songs by Foo Fighters, like Resolve, like some other hits from this album, just tarnished it in my memory to the point that I can.
Sorry.
I got that message as well. It was from Neil.
Yeah.
Friend of the show, Neil. I say friend of the show, Neil. He's a part of this, but I digress.
Part of the show, Neil.
Part of the show, Neil. Part of the furniture, Neil. And so I think I can't listen to that song without feeling like I've heard it 3 minutes ago. The other thing is, and I know you are going to hard disagree with this, is I think this is the first foray for Foo Fighters into the realms of dad rock.
No. You want to talk dad rock Foo Fighters? We're getting there. This is not it yet. Dad rock Foo Fighters doesn't start until 2014.
I think, as I say, they're not going full dad rock, but I think there is touches of it, and this is indicative of the fact of you see this in. I mean, I showed it as a goof yesterday to you. The Match of the Day 2009 football compilation CD had this as the opening track, and that was like, that's a dad rock album. It's a dad rock track. I don't get me wrong. As I say, there's no Foo Fighters album I would say is inherently bad, but I think after what we had in the late 90s and what is to come, this is an low rather than a peak for the band.
So, as I was saying, disc 1 of this album, where it just sat, this would be A, maybe even S tier for me. Very, very good tier. Very good tier. Unfortunately, it's not just that. It is a double album, and the second half, as I said, is purely acoustic. And now the Foo Fighters can do acoustic pretty well. I just don't think the songs are particularly good on the second half of this album, unfortunately. It's got a couple of moments. There's a song called Miracle, which I've always liked, but mostly because it was used in an episode of Scrubs really well. You get Cold Day in the Sun, which is the first recorded, I don't know if it's the first recorded, it was the first included on an album track that Taylor Hawkins sings, which was a good bit of fun. But on the whole, there's just not an awful lot going for the second half of this album. It certainly drags the first half down. I mean, you think of double albums, you think of Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, and that's an album you finish the first disc and you want to keep listening. You think of The Fragile by Nine Inch Nails, you finish the first disc, you want to keep listening. In Your Honor, you finish the first disc, you want to throw the second one out the window, frankly. I unfortunately, because you have to take it as a whole, that does therefore mean to me that most of the second album is filler, and very unfortunate filler. I'm sure there are people who swear by the second half of the album. I'm not one of those people. Unfortunately, therefore, it does mean I'm sort of looking at a C tier, probably.
I can dig it. I can dig that. Would you say, as a collective, worse or better than One by One?
I think One by One is better purely as a collective because you have to include the second disc.
Okay.
First disc on its own, top tier. As a package, C tier.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, so next one is a slight anomaly out of the pack because it is a live album. I think we should include Skin and Bones, the 2006 live album. This is an album that, to my shame, I haven't listened to all that much, but I do know this title track, and that is another sort of more melancholic, pensive, downbeat track of theirs, but one that I really dig, and I think is a very, very good song. How much exposure have you had to the live album, Dobby?
So I've listened to it a few times in my time. Unfortunately, this bears the cross of having a lot of the acoustic tracks from In Your Honor on it. Because, it was the acoustic portion of their In Your Honor tour. And it doesn't really save it for me. I've watched I have the DVD of it. And that's a much better time. Listening to it, I don't care very much. You get cool acoustic renditions of, Times Like These and Next Year, but it's just, there's not a lot of saving it really. If you're in the mood for it, it's a good listen. But if I'm listening to Foo Fighters, it's probably the album I'm going to reach for last.
Interesting. So with that in mind, do we have our first D tier?
It's Foo Fighters.
We got to put it in the Foo Fighters, and I think the fact that it's a live album is a notch against it. But so you can't really hold it against them. But yeah, something's got to foot the table, so we'll whack it there. But then we will get back to this list with a bang with 2007's Echo, Silence, Patience, and Grace, which I have to say is a triumphant return to form for Foo Fighters.
Echo, Silence, Patience, and Grace was the album I got into the Foo Fighters on purely because The Pretender came out when I was getting into music, and I was already into the Foo Fighters at this point. I'd been playing the singles over and over again. Pretender came out. I think I saw them play Tea in the Park or something on TV, and I was like, yeah, having that. So I bought the album. Love it. It's great. It's the sort of, again, to go back to the Foo Fighters Back and Forth documentary. If you've not seen that, you should see that, 'cause that's astounding. Dave Grohl talks about having an epiphany moment where he realized he can do both the rock and the sort of melancholic acousticy stuff in one package. Here it is, and it's pretty good for the most part. There's one or two duff moments, but on the whole, I can listen to this front to back and have a great time.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, it's another one that starts off arguably with the strongest track, which is The Pretender. But tracks like Let It Die, Long Road to Ruin are all... They are a mixed bag, but not in terms of quality, but in terms of sort of what you get. And I think that is a testament to the album, that it doesn't pigeonhole itself as either the heavy side or the soft side. It is a good mix of everything. Again, it's another. I don't know how much sort of credence we should give the music videos, but like the videos to The Pretender, and particularly Long Road to Ruin, in which it's sort of done in like a faux 60s, 70s sitcom style with Dave Grohl playing Davy Grohlton. It's so good. It's so funny. And
maybe there's a ranking spanking in the future for Foo Fighters music videos. Because if you're going to do a music video episode, the Foo Fighters are the one to do it with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're sort of, again, it fits sort of the range of Foo Fighters so well, because you've got the comedy and sort of the silliness of the video with Long Road to Ruin, and then you've just got sort of the balls to the wall epicness of The Pretender, where it's sort of that sort of defiant standoff against the riot police and just a wall of paint exploding, and it just suits it so well. I would be inclined to put this in A tier personally.
I was going to say much the same thing. Yeah, that might be a surprise to some people as well, I'd say, but I'd say A tier definitely for Echo Silence.
Above or below There Is Nothing Left to Lose?
I think purely by virtue of There Is Nothing Left to Lose having more, shall we say, outright bangers, I think There Is Nothing Left to Lose has to sit above it.
I would agree. I would agree. Now, moving on, there was a greatest hits album released in 2009, but I mean, the only new track it had on was Wheels.
Wheels and Word Forward.
I mean, I only remember Wheels, and that's a very dad rock song. So I mean, it's not in this rankings list, so we'll gloss past it purely because I want to talk about Wasting Light, which is another one of my favorite Foo Fighters albums. Dobby, I know this is an album you have a lot of time for as well, so take it away.
Yeah, Wasting Light's my favourite Foo Fighters album. I don't know. I guess it was the whole thing around it. The first time I saw Foo Fighters was on the Wasting Light tour a few months after this came out. The Foo Fighters Back and Forth documentary covers the making of this at the end and came out just before the album did, I believe. Even the album cover's great. Look at the album cover. It's just, oh wow. The best opening song in the Foo Fighters history, and I'm including All My Life, the best opening song in Foo Fighters history is Bridge Burning from this album. It is astounding. And when they opened with that at Milton Keynes Bowl in 2011, that 30-second build up to Dave Grohl just screaming, "These are my famous last words." That was, the air just left my lungs and never came back that day, I swear.
He's still
That
dead.
was incredible. Yeah, I'm still dead. The singles, there's great singles. I would say when it comes to the singles on this album, Rope is a great song, but Walk is the single. Walk is both the album closer and the set staple, really, from this album. It is incredible. You get tracks in the middle, like Dear Rosemary, which has Bob Mould guest vocaling, White Limo, which is genuinely up there as one of my favorite Foo Fighters songs. Yeah, you get Arlandria, which is just I'm going to keep saying incredible. This is an incredible album. The only time in this album when I sort of have a bit of I'm not sure on that one is the ninth track, Mr. Misery, which I still think is a 9 out of 10, frankly. This, front to back, just an incredible album. And I mean, when I'm sort of flipping back and forth between Colour and the Shape and Wasting Light, I think genuinely, I know that Wasting Light remains my favourite, and I'm just saying Colour and the Shape because I feel I have to. I love this album so much.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really, you've sort of touched on all the points, but it's I don't know if it was intentional or if it's just my hearing of it, but the production value on this album seems to have been intentionally stripped back a bit to be sort of that more sort of gritty garage sound.
Well, this is the thing. They recorded it in his garage, didn't they? They built a studio in his garage to do it. And instead of recording on computer, they recorded 2 analog tape.
I did not know this.
Yeah, and they brought in Butch Vig, who is probably my favourite music producer, who also produced Nevermind, of course. And on the whole, it worked. It did it. They did it. Well done. Good job.
I noticed it and I enjoyed it a lot. So mission accomplished. I think this has been their best album of the 2010s. I say that as if we are still in the 2010s. In my mind, we're still in the 2010s. I think it's high time for a 10th anniversary repressing on vinyl, please.
I've got it on vinyl, but it's not a repressing. I got it for Christmas, as a matter of fact.
I would like a big old, Merry Christmas. I would like a big old double gatefold one, but yes. I would say I prefer the Colour and the Shape just about. With that being said, you are a bigger Foo Fighters fan, and the passion you have exuded for this album leads me to believe it should top the rankings. So I'm going to put it there.
I would agree, but let's be fair here. Both of these are basically on par.
Yeah, absolutely.
So S tier in this instance is just super.
They are both very good, very good. Now we take a look at an interesting album, Sonic Highways of 2014. Now, you say that there is an album that came out in 2014 that exemplified dad rock Foo Fighters. Is this the album you're talking of?
Of course it is. I'd still say this isn't full dad rock yet.
No.
I think Sonic Highways is more of an experiment than an album. And as an experiment, I think it's an interesting one. If you're taking it as, here's what they did. They went to 8 different cities, took in the culture, recorded a song for each of those cities. I think that's really interesting. If you've watched the Sonic Highways documentary that came out alongside it, which is much better than the album, frankly, you do have a wider understanding and appreciation for the album, I think. But I mean, outside, the tracks on this album, I don't particularly want to listen to outside of the album. If I'm listening to the album, I can have a good time, but it's just, it is what it is. It's an experiment rather than a cohesive set of music, I think.
The only one that I go back to is The Feast and the Famine, which I think was the lead single of it, which does have a little bit more.
Something from Nothing was the lead single, but
Okay.
Feast and the Famine was the Washington DC track, which has obviously got all the hardcore punk influence, which is why I imagine it's your favourite.
Yeah, I do enjoy the rougher edge of their stuff, and yeah, it is the one that sort of steers clearest away from the dad rock sound, so that's probably why I enjoy it. But it's inoffensive, but there's nothing too memorable about it, which leads me to believe it's either a C or it's a D. Foo Fighters.
I would put it at the top of Foo Fighters, purely because it's not on level of One by One or In Your Honor, frankly.
Fair enough. It sits snugly alongside Skin and Bones in the Foo Fighters. Now we move on to another release which isn't an album. It is the Saint Cecilia EP of 2015. Mm-hmm. Now, this is an EP we were discussing off camera that as I say, yesterday at time of recording, that this is an EP that kind of passed me by. I'd never really listened to it or given it the proper sort of front to back treatment. And god damn, it's great. It's so good.
It is incredible. 2 seconds, Tom.
That's okay.
Mum, that's very loud. Yes, it is. Sorry, Tom.
You were saying it's great.
The Saint Cecilia EP is just... It's the sort of thing you don't necessarily think the Foo Fighters would have had in their pocket, frankly, by the time Sonic Highways had come out. But it's just punk as fuck, really, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I mean, you can tell it's 40-odd-year-olds making it, but it's just full of energy and life. If memory serves, they recorded it in a week or two in Saint Cecilia, which is how it got its name. It opens with a track called Saint Cecilia, which is astounding. Then you get a proper punk rock banger in Sean. Oh. You get Save Your Breath, Iron Rooster?
Yes, Iron Rooster.
Iron Rooster.
Sounds
and
like
then it ends with a song that genuinely, I think, were it on any Foo Fighters album, would be well loved. The Neverending Sigh is astounding. That'd be a great... That's a closer in the vein of New Way Home off The Color and the Shape for me, The Neverending Sigh. I think because when this came out, it was released for free through their website, if memory serves. So I think it got a lot of traffic. But I think nowadays people tend to forget it's existed. And that's a shame, because there are great songs on this. I remember when the next album we'll talk about, Concrete and Gold, was coming out, Foo Fighters did like a sort of mini tour around Europe just before it came out, and they were playing Sean. And I remember seeing a video, I think, of them playing in Italy or something, and people were going mad for it as if they'd never heard it, which is a shame. I'd love to see these songs live. Unfortunately, again, when it comes to the Foo Fighters, when they're playing live, they just tend to play the hits and not a lot else nowadays, which is a bit of a shame. I mean, this last year would have been the 25th anniversary. Maybe they've switched it up. It's not the 25th anniversary anymore. Who knows? So, but Saint Cecilia, it's an EP that I think is better than a handful of the Foo Fighters' own albums, really.
I would agree. I would say, again, it may be a little bit of recency bias because I only listened to it this morning, but goddamn, I would put it in A. I would also put it in A. I would say somewhere between There Is Nothing Left to Lose and Echo Silence.
I am echoing that, straight in the middle.
Very good, very good. I love it when we get along. And we move on to the last album at time of recording before the release of the new one, which is 2017's Concrete and Gold. Now, this is another album that I didn't really listen to until today. Again, maybe it's because of a little bit of fatigue in the past few years of Foo Fighters, like ill-placed fatigue when you look at stuff like Saint Cecilia. But This is an an album that didn't do a lot for me aside from the singles again, I'm afraid.
Dad rocked the album. The singles aren't even that great on Concrete and Gold, quite frankly. I think Concrete and Gold, when it initially came out, I had a lot of fun. I enjoyed listening to it front to back, but outside of front to back, I think other than Run, which is the lead single, There's not an awful lot from this album I've gone back to frequently. I listen to La Di Da a lot. La Di Da's a really good song. I sing Dirty Water to myself every so often. But it's, it's not very good, to be honest. I don't think it's bad, but it sort of straddles the line of fine, really.
Yeah, the only other one that I go back to is The Sky is the Neighborhood is pretty fun. But aside from that, yeah, it's just very middle of the road again. Inoffensive, but nothing outstanding. And it's a shame because it goes to show that when Foo Fighters kind of remove sort of, the high polish and the studio influence, and they do stuff like Wasting Light or Saint Cecilia, where it's just them chilling and hanging out for a few days, they still can produce something with a lot of edge, a lot of grit, and some real bangers. But then I don't know if it's a smidge of self-indulgence or as you say, sort of studio interference to try and sort of polish them up a bit too much, but it just loses a little bit of something with this album.
I can't remember the name of the producer. I think his name is Greg Kurovitz, maybe. Let me have a quick look.
Craig Kirsten,
there we go. So he's more typically known for producing, I don't know if it's pop acts, but sort of.
Just looking, he's produced Sia, Halsey, Kelly Clarkson, Paul McCartney, Lily Allen, Pink. So not exactly who you would call hard rock.
Yeah. So I don't think it's necessarily studio interference, because I don't think the Foo Fighters are going to get much in the way of studio interference this point in their career. I think they chose him purely because they thought he was the right man for the job. And either what they wanted wasn't particularly good, or he's done something to it. Now, I've heard that Medicine at Midnight, which is going to be coming out either before this, probably today, or this week at the very least when you're watching this, I've heard rumblings that it's pretty good, which excites me. I know he's producing again, and maybe it's a case of Concrete and Gold being the experiment before they got it properly right the next time. We'll have to wait and see. But Concrete and Gold, I mean, Sonic Highways was an experiment that I think works as an experiment, but not necessarily an album. Concrete and Gold isn't an experiment, and sort of works as an album, but doesn't stick in the mind very much. So when we talk about Dad Rock Foo Fighters, Concrete and Gold is definitely what I'm thinking about. But absolutely. Even then, they've got a song like Run where Dave is just screaming his head off.
I mean, they are dads as well, so you got to cut them a little bit of slack as well.
Yeah.
I mean, what is Dave Grohl's like? He must be over 50 now.
He's 53.
Wow. Doesn't look a day over 52. I'm joking. He's still a very.
He's definitely looking his age now. He's 52, as a matter of fact.
He is a handsome son of a gun, no matter his age. And I still get excited for most Foo Fighters releases, and I am looking forward to the new one. I think it's gonna end up in high B. Is my absolutely uneducated guess, but we should probably put Concrete and Gold somewhere first, shouldn't we? I'm thinking bottom of C, personally.
Bottom of C. I think I'd take Sonic Highways over this, so I'd put it in the middle of D.
Oh, fair enough. We will put it in the middle of Foo Fighters. So there we go. But yes, I'm optimistically saying that it's Medicine at Midnight.
Yep.
It's going to go in mid B. So we shall see what it's like. But I think this is a pretty sound look at the Foo Fighters discography up until now. Is there anything you would move about looking at it in its completed form?
Yeah, I think I'd put One by One into B.
You think?
I think I would.
Okay. I'm not against that. Again, this is an album that I remember listening to a lot, at least the single, should I say. So I think it's definitely better than In Your Honor, and it's not as good as the self-titled debut. So yeah, I think low B is fair. Anything else, or are you pretty contented with what it's looking like?
I'm pretty snappy with the rest of that, to be honest.
Fair enough. Then I will do the rundown. At the bottom we have the live album, Skin and Bones. Then we have Concrete and Gold, Sonic Highways. In C tier we have In Your Honor. B tier, Just sneaking in there is One by One, then the self-titled album from 95. A tier we have Echo, Silence, Patience and Grace, followed by the Saint Cecilia EP and There Is Nothing Left to Lose. And topping the table, right in the top of very good, we have The Colour and the Shape and the very best Foo Fighters album in our humble opinions. Dobby's less so humble, Wasting Light. Great discography though. I mean, when you look at sort of bands of their era and everything, no band has really had sort of the longevity of Foo Fighters, and I think having consistently good album releases, because the thing is that it's not like all of their best albums are their early albums. Like there is a nice spread of sort of their later releases and their earlier releases near the top, which shows that they've never really, although every album has ups and every band has ups and downs, they've never had like a consistent decline. They've always managed to bring the goods when they needed to.
Yeah, it's difficult for me, right? Because I mean, if I were doing this of my own accord, I know full well that most of these albums would probably end up sort of. I think Wasting Light and Colour and Shape would be the only S tiers, but I think most of them would be A and B. Certainly, well, I think One by One would probably be A. Foo Fighters would probably be A, and I think In Your Honor would probably be C tier purely because of the second half of the album. But when you've got to take a catalogue as it is, and, I think this is a pretty good smattering and fairly reliable. Certainly for us at the very least.
There we go. Well, I think that does it, unless you have any final thoughts on the Foo Fighters.
No. Just go and watch the Foo Fighters documentary if you've not seen it. Back and Forth is great.
There you go. That is your homework. Well, thank you very much for watching. Let us know what your ranking of Foo Fighters albums are in the description, comments below. Only we control the description. And let us know if you like this format and if there's any band's discography we should feature next. I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and I would love to look back at some other iconic bands and just enjoy their fruits of their labor. But in the meantime, my name is Tom, and this is my good pal Dobby.
Nearly forgot me there, didn't you?
Yeah. The problem is I haven't got you up in camera because I'm doing the screen share, so you're just a disembodied voice to me. Of course I'm joined by Dobby.
Yeah, hi everyone, bye.
Hi, bye. And this has been UDS Music, which sounds weird to say because it's still a new channel, but yeah, hopefully we'll have more on the horizon. See you next time. Foo
Goodbye.
Fight away.